We obsess over the cinematic threats of a societal collapse. We stockpile ammunition, hoard freeze-dried food, and fortify our doors against marauders. Yet, the mechanism of your demise is likely sitting quietly down the hall, wrapped in pristine white porcelain. The modern flush toilet is a ticking biological time bomb. The paradox of the modern survivalist is that they will survive the initial chaos only to be utterly decimated by their own bodily waste. When municipal water pressure drops to zero, the illusion of civilization vanishes instantly. People assume they can just use a scavenged bucket of water to manually flush the toilet. This is a fatal miscalculation. Using clean water to move human waste during a collapse is a catastrophic misallocation of a life-saving resource. A standard flush requires over a gallon of liquid. In a true grid-down scenario, every single drop of water is the fundamental difference between basic cellular function and systemic failure. You cannot afford to pour your survival down the drain. If you stop flushing, the bowl simply fills. Within 48 hours, an unflushable toilet transforms from a household convenience into a localized ground zero for lethal pathogens. We're talking about Vibrio cholerae, Shigella, and severe parasitic infections. People misunderstand how these diseases operate. Cholera kills through radical, violent dehydration. It does not wait weeks for you to starve to death. It drains your body of fluids and essential electrolytes so rapidly that a perfectly healthy adult can go from asymptomatic to a lifeless husk in under 12 hours. You essentially bleed out water. The first biological reality we must confront is the nature of the pathogen vector. The human gastrointestinal tract hosts billions of bacteria. When that waste is expelled and left to stagnate in a pool of water inside a warm, unventilated house, those bacteria multiply at an exponential rate. Flies locate this breeding ground almost immediately. A single housefly can carry over 1 million microscopic pathogens on its legs, transferring them from your ruined bathroom directly to the precious food rations sitting in your kitchen. This is the fecal-oral route of transmission. It is the silent, unseen grim reaper of historical sieges, from medieval fortresses to the prolonged nightmare of Sarajevo in the 1990s. The survivors of the Bosnian War will tell you that the snipers were terrifying, but the unseen microbes breeding in the high-rise apartment bathrooms were the true apex predators. Let us examine the basic chemistry of why the modern toilet fails so spectacularly without running water. Water is a universal solvent. When feces and urine mix in a stagnant pool, the liquid acts as both an incubator and a rapid transport mechanism for bacteria. It creates a highly volatile slurry that aggressively off-gasses ammonia and hydrogen sulfide. Moisture is the absolute catalyst for bacterial reproduction and catastrophic odor. That smell is not just offensive to your senses, it is a chemical distress signal announcing to every insect in the vicinity that a nutrient-rich breeding ground is open for business. Therefore, to survive the collapse of the sanitation grid, you cannot fight this enemy with a rifle or a trauma kit. You must engineer your way out of the biohazard zone before the infection takes root. You must abandon the porcelain bowl entirely and revert to a primitive, unglamorous, but highly effective sanitary protocol. The solution costs roughly $1 to build, takes 5 minutes to assemble, and requires absolute, unflinching discipline from everyone in your group. It is the dry loo, a system based entirely on strict biological isolation and moisture control. The foundation of this system relies on bypassing complex solutions entirely, ignoring the temporary illusion of hygiene provided by expensive camping toilets. Component number 1 is the vessel itself. The misconception is that you need specialized, heavily engineered survival gear to manage off-grid sanitation. People stockpile chemical packets and intricate portable latrines with flushing mechanisms, forgetting that when the supply chain snaps, those proprietary chemicals and fragile plastic parts vanish. The brutal reality lies in the strict physics of desiccation. Bacteria require a highly specific water activity level to undergo cellular division. Deprive the pathogen of moisture, and you halt the chain of infection at its biological source. The tactical fix is the ubiquitous 5-gallon high-density polyethylene bucket, a universally available item easily scavenged for free from abandoned construction sites, commercial kitchens, or hardware stores. You must line this bucket with the thickest, heaviest-duty plastic bag you can acquire. Contractor-grade cleanup bags are the absolute standard here. A tear in a flimsy residential trash liner introduces raw biological contamination directly to the container itself, complicating your sanitation protocol, requiring dangerous cleanup, and wasting precious time you do not have. Operational rule number 2 is the strict implementation of the separation principle. The fatal trap is believing that simply using a bucket and tossing a plastic lid on top solves the problem. A closed lid on raw, uncovered waste merely creates a sealed anaerobic incubator. When you inevitably open that lid for the next use, you release a concentrated, invisible plume of noxious gas and aerosolized bacteria directly into your living space. To neutralize this chemical threat, we look directly to the carbon cycle. Human waste is incredibly nitrogen-rich and deeply saturated with moisture. When it breaks down anaerobically, meaning without oxygen, it rapidly produces highly toxic hydrogen sulfide and ammonia. By introducing a carbon-heavy, highly absorbent dry material, you alter the fundamental chemical decomposition process. The immediate introduction of a dense carbon barrier chemically suppresses odor and physically blocks insect vectors. After every single use, without a single exception, the deposit must be completely covered with a thick layer of biological desiccant. Hardwood sawdust is the gold standard for this application, but you can utilize dry topsoil, fireplace ash, or even unscented clay cat litter. The absolute requirement is that the cover material must be bone dry. You dump the carbon material over the deposit entirely until nothing is visible and absolutely no moisture remains on the surface. This unglamorous act of burying the nitrogen and carbon instantly locks down the off-gassing process. It aggressively pulls the moisture out of the waste, dropping the water activity far below the threshold required for cholera and dysentery to survive. When executed correctly, the bucket sits quietly in your bathroom, completely odorless, rendering a deadly pathogen factory entirely inert. The third mandatory protocol is psychological compliance. The modern individual often assumes that once a physical survival system is constructed, the environmental threat is permanently neutralized. The cold reality is that human behavior degrades precipitously under extreme cognitive load. When caloric intake drops and sleep deprivation sets in, exhausted people begin to take shortcuts. A tired family member might skip the sawdust covering during a midnight bathroom trip. A single behavioral lapse in sanitation discipline is all it takes to collapse your entire biological defense perimeter. The reproductive cycle of the common fly requires only a microscopic surface area of exposed waste and a matter of minutes to deposit hundreds of disease-laden eggs. Therefore, the tactical fix is enforcing a rigid, militaristic household doctrine. You must treat the dry loo with the exact same strict operational protocol as a loaded firearm. A secondary container holding your dry cover material must sit permanently next to the toilet bucket, complete with a dedicated scoop. There are no exceptions for age or fatigue. Every deposit is immediately buried, effectively isolating the biological threat layer by layer. The final critical failure occurs the moment the bucket reaches its physical capacity. The deadly misconception among the unprepared is that simply transporting the waste out of the immediate living quarters closes the biological equation. Amateurs will carry their heavy, sealed plastic bags into the backyard and either toss them into a blind pile or bury them in a hastily dug hole. They operate under the delusion that out of sight equates to out of the contamination zone. The brutal reality of hydrology and soil mechanics dictates otherwise. When you bury concentrated human waste improperly, you are essentially constructing a subterranean biological weapon. As rainfall hits the ground, it naturally percolates through the dirt, passing directly through your buried cache. This interaction generates a highly toxic leachate, a liquid slurry of dissolved bacteria that obeys the relentless pull of gravity, sinking deeper into the earth until it intersects with the local water table. If you contaminate the underlying aquifer, you have permanently poisoned the exact water source your entire group relies on for survival. Pathogens, like those responsible for dysentery, can thrive in damp, dark, subterranean environments for months, silently migrating toward your well or nearby streams. You do not succumb to the odor in your bathroom, but rather to the invisible poison you unknowingly pumped into your own hydration supply. The next crucial variable is the physical landscape itself. You must aggressively analyze the topography of your surrounding environment before breaking ground. Water flows strictly downhill, and it carries its microscopic cargo with it. If you position your disposal trench at a higher elevation than your shelter or your designated water procurement area, you have fundamentally compromised your defensive perimeter. During a heavy downpour or a sudden thaw, the surface runoff will aggressively wash across the landscape, potentially eroding your excavated dirt and sweeping the recently buried biohazard directly back into your operational space. Topographical awareness is the invisible shield standing between secure containment and a localized epidemic. Your designated sanitation zone must always be located strictly downhill and down gradient from any area where human activity, cooking, or water collection occurs. The tactical fix demands mastering the lost historical skill of strategic trenching. You must calculate your disposal zone with the precise, unforgiving logic of a military engineer. The absolute minimum safe distance for any waste trench is 200 feet from standing water, running streams, or ground wells. Furthermore, you must understand the microscopic battlefield of soil biology. You cannot simply bury the waste 6 feet deep and walk away. At that extreme depth, the subsoil is effectively sterile, completely lacking the oxygen and robust microbial life necessary to break down the pathogens. The waste will sit in the dark, acting as a toxic time capsule, waiting to leach into the groundwater. True biological neutralization occurs exclusively within the active organic layer of the topsoil. You must dig a trench no deeper than 18 to 24 inches. This specific depth places the waste directly into the biological strike zone, where millions of naturally occurring soil microbes, fungi, and nematodes will actively attack, consume, and dismantle the human pathogens. Once the waste bag is deposited into the trench, you must slash the plastic to grant the native soil microbes immediate access to the contents, then cover the trench completely with the excavated dirt. You must pack the earth down tightly to deter scavenging animals and completely erase the visual signature of the site. By forcing the native ecosystem to do the heavy metabolic lifting, you transform a lethal biohazard into harmless, sanitized earth over a period of several months. The ultimate realization of grid-down survival is that you can no longer outsource your biological existence. The misconception of the modern prepper is that surviving the initial collapse is the finish line, and that a bunker filled with vacuum-sealed rations and advanced optics is the ultimate guarantee of tomorrow. They view survival as a defensive war against external human threats. The brutal reality of history and microbiology is that the most dangerous siege you will face is mounted by your own physiology. When municipal services evaporate, you do not just lose convenience, you become the infrastructure itself. You are now the water treatment plant, the waste management facility, and the primary vector control agency for your entire group. If you fail to manage the most basic, unglamorous metabolic output of your own body, your expensive tactical gear will simply be scavenged from your cholera-ridden corpse by someone who understood the carbon cycle. The overarching paradigm shift requires you to stop fighting the environment and start weaponizing the ecosystem. We have spent a century relying on centralized, chemically treated water systems to flush our problems out of sight and out of mind. In a true collapse, that linear system shatters. The tactical fix is to close the loop. You must integrate your biology directly into the immediate environment. By utilizing the separation principle, burying nitrogen with carbon, and feeding that inert compound back into the active microbial layer of the topsoil, you are not just disposing of waste, you are participating in a relentless, unforgiving natural order that has processed death and decay for millions of years. True survival is the mastery of inputs and outputs, governed strictly by the laws of thermodynamics and biological decay. Let us look at the historical precedent one last time. During the worst modern sieges, the people who survived were not the ones who hoarded the most ammunition, but the ones who adapted their daily habits to the harsh realities of germ theory. They boiled their water, They managed their latrines, and they understood that a single fly landing on a piece of bread was a more immediate threat to their family than a sniper on a distant rooftop. They survived because they respected the invisible world. The final operational directive is to build the dry loo today. You must secure your desiccant cover material. You must map your topography and designate your trenching zones before the municipal water pressure drops and the panic sets in. The preparation costs essentially nothing and requires minimal labor, but it demands a complete psychological reset. You have to accept that the porcelain convenience in your home is a relic of a highly fragile era that could end tomorrow. The end of the world will not look like a cinematic battlefield. It will be alarmingly quiet. The environments of the survivors will smell of wood shavings and freshly turned earth, while the homes of the unprepared will smell of sickness and systemic failure. The apocalypse is not a gunfight. It is a microscopic war of attrition. You will either master your own biology, or your biology will inevitably destroy you.